Hi. Thanks for coming. My name is Vadim Drobinin, and I will be talking today about independent watchOS apps, about principles and practices. So if you watched WWDC this year about the watchOS, you probably heard that now we can do independent apps running only on watchOS without any extension in terms of iPhones. And if you watched the session from the beginning till the end, you've probably seen that, well, making an independent watchOS app is as simple as probably just putting a check mark, like that. Independent watchOS apps are easy. Build them. It's cool. Thank you. Unfortunately, it's not just that. If you would do that with your existing app, because putting a check mark is easy, it probably won't work the way you expected. Because this change means a shift of paradigm. This means we should think different about the way we build apps for watchOS. Because till today, till this most recent announcement from Apple, the watchOS was always considered to be an extension to your iPhone. And if you would think about the apps people usually build for watchOS, it would be something like, I know, health tracking, notifications, changing the music which is playing your AirPods. Now everything changes. And to understand why this is a huge change, we will go through all these stages and realize what was so beautiful about this year's announcement. So first, we will go back to the roots. We will understand how wearable devices evolved and what was it for us in watchOS 1 till 5, and what changed in watchOS 6, and what are the principles and best practices of building apps for watchOS 6. And we will briefly touch the Watch App Store, because lots of people are concerned about promoting their apps in the App Store. For some people, it's the only source of users' acquisition. And Watch App Store is slightly different from the App Store we are used to. And then we will summarize all of that. So if we would go back to the roots, we would think about all these devices which used to be popular back then and were called the wearable devices or personal computers or the pocket computers. And the first ones were actually introduced in 13th century. The eyeglasses, the first eyeglasses were created back then. And in 16th century, there were first wearable clocks. And there is a legend that the Queen Elizabeth I had the ring-shaped alarm on her finger, which would poke her in the time when she needed to do something. It kept evolving. In 1960s, there was a Beat the Dealer clock, which was the first tiny computer put into the shoe of the card player or the casino player, and you would use it to beat the dealer to understand how the roulette would behave using a computer in your shoe. And then there was a calculator wristwatch, which was, well, probably the closest we get to nowadays wearable watches. And after that, there was the organizer, one of the first PDAs, and the Bluetooth headset. And in 21st century, we just went wild. We introduced the Nike Plus, the Fitbit. Google Glasses weren't that successful, could be in the future. And the Apple Watch in 2014. But if you look at that scale and think about what actually affected the nowadays world, the gadgets we use every day, we have in the pocket, we check 120 times a day at least, these were the PDAs. This is the Casio PDA, the Cassiopeia 150. And these PDAs shaped the way we interact with smartphones now, because smartphones came later, and then came the wearables. And when you look back at the Apple Watch, which was introduced in 2014, and think about its purpose, the best source of its purpose would be a book published by Apple, which is defining the Apple's Watch purpose as tell time and track fitness. No surprise people didn't build something else for Apple Watch, given the beneficial effects of promoting health awareness and being potentially distracting for users. But now everything changes, and Apple says it's more insightful and more delightful. Is it really? It probably is, because so first they introduced the dedicated App Store, which means you are not wired anymore to the iOS ecosystem. And you can stand out because the Watch App Store is relatively small, so it's a great market to explore. There are new APIs for developers, which is always great. And if you think about building for watchOS 6, you probably can support all the new APIs and drop them for the previous versions. Software updates without the iPhone was something folks were asking for a very long time because, well, how can we pretend it's a separate device if we need an iPhone to update it? So we don't anymore, which is great. They, as always, introduce some user-facing features like new watch faces or noise app, which usually tells that something is slightly loud. You can go and see your HR and ask to, give you the noise-canceling earphones. Cycle tracking app, activity trends. The Apple Watch is still aiming to improve your health awareness, the fitness levels. But if you look at these features, it's visible that health is not the only priority anymore, and we can do way more than that. So among all the new APIs for developers they introduced in watchOS 6, the most standing out was independent apps. But also to help you building that, they introduced the extended runtime and streaming audio API, which was something available only for Apple Music in the past. And signing with Apple to make the flow of your new users way, way simpler and easier on the watchOS. And the Carmel and the neural agent, so you can train your models right on the watch and get better results when the user doesn't have phone. What does it mean for us? The future. This might be the future of wearable devices, given all the technologies and APIs and effort Apple puts into the tiny gadget on your wrist. But to get the best out of that, we need to focus on all the best practices and all the new APIs they provided. So in watchOS 6, they introduced the new background modes for apps that needed extended runtime, and these extended runtime goes beyond your usual workout or audio routines or the navigation sessions. And it allows you not only preserve the battery life, which is very important, but also bring the users new experience. For example, by providing runtime to some specific and targeted tasks, like self-care tasks or mindfulness, physical therapy, health monitoring, and alarming. And also as a benefit on top, it preserves battery because you can tell the watchOS better when the process should be running in the background and when it shouldn't, which, well, benefits both developers and users. And extended runtime is pretty limited to these set of features I showed before, and it's usually meant for non-workout activities. What does it mean for us? If you need to build an app for a workout activity, look for the workout APIs or try to avoid building something Apple already invented. And because it doesn't meant for the workout activities, it won't affect your move or exercise rings, which makes sense if you look at the mindfulness or self-care parts. And the heart rate sensor is off by default to save the battery to avoid the redundant tracking and so on. So you still can turn it on if you need it. You can ask the user for the permission and use the health data, but by default, it's not needed for extended runtimes. Extended runtimes are meant for guidelines for the meditation sessions and so on. And working with them is almost as simple as building independent apps. So with independent apps, apparently it's just a check mark, and here it's instantiation of the runtime session and setting the delegate, starting it when the app is active, and at some point invalidating it, because otherwise you might face the system limitation and you won't be able to trigger this session again in a limited period of time. Also, there are new streaming audio APIs, and they are pretty powerful because they support the AVQ player, which wasn't a thing for watchOS before. You can provide your own custom audio protocols. You can use the network framework. You can use the streaming tasks with the URL session, which wasn't available as well. And the new thing in iOS 13 and watchOS 6 are the WebSocket support, the native ones. So you can build way more with that. And when something gets introduced for both iOS and watchOS, it's always very convenient. And of course, the AV player and AVQ player, which are super powerful and super convenient to work with. Sign in with Apple, as I said, if you want to use sign in with Apple, it's almost as simple as using the sign in with Apple on iOS. You need to provide the Apple ID button, and you need to use the authentication services for all the needed callbacks. But that doesn't limit you. You can still create an app without user accounts or create your custom form to sign up or sign in. And Carmel is pretty new to watchOS. It was there before, but the neural agent training and the models updating wasn't that common. What does it mean for us? Well, it means that you can build more things, like the use of sound analysis framework, where you can use these frameworks to analyze audio and recognize whatever happens around. For example, by the built-in trained model, you can distinguish loafer from applauses, which would be probably super handy for speakers at the conferences. Imagine the watchOS app, which just tells you, well, they are not uploading, they are laughing. ML update task and the other collection of tasks around updating the core model is pretty convenient as well. So you can update the model with more training data once you gather it. For example, the user is running outside only with the watch, and you gather this data and you update in the real time to train a better model to suggest probably the user how to take the better route or breathe better and properly and whatever else. So these things are pretty powerful. These tools can be used in lots of scenarios, and it's super exciting to see what will be done with them. Which kind of summarize that, yeah, it might be the future, but it depends on us what we do with that. So let's talk about the principles. Apple Watch was designed for quick interactions that make the most of the display and its position on the user's wrist. So information should be quick, should be easy to access, should be easy to dismiss, and the best apps should support fast interactions and focus on the content the user care about the most, which means lightweight interactions are the core foundation of the apps built for the watchOS. Apple has quite a few guidelines about that, and I recommend you looking at them up to realize whether it applies to the apps you build or it could be done better in your case. The second foundation the Apple refers to is called holistic design, which means Apple Watch is trying its best to remove the boundaries between the hardware, the device on your wrist, and the software. So the digital crown, the haptic engine were designed to make sure you don't feel like the device is separated from the software. You want to interact with that seamlessly. You want to see the on-screen context seamlessly, which means your apps should help with that and should make sure the user feels like hardware and software are indistinguishable. And if you look at the apps Apple built for Apple Watch, they are pretty much the same. They utilize the use of the digital crown. They utilize the force touch, and that makes the flow way, way better because the user feels that they are really a continuation of their hand. And the next one is personal communication, which means Apple Watch was designed to be worn the whole day, and its UI is kind of attuned to the user who has it on their wrist, to their presence, because Apple Watch is fairly useless if it's not on your wrist. And that brings us to this personal communication between Apple Watch and the user. So no other Apple device, if you think about that, was so close to the user all of the time. And that brings your apps closer to the user as well. And this connection is quite sacred. You should be very mindful about that. You shouldn't abuse it for users. You shouldn't think that if the device is so closely connected to the user, you can bother them with meaningless data, for example, or the random notifications. So when you build apps for Apple Watch, please think about the personal communication it produces. Think about this link between the watch and the user, and think how your app can contribute to that. Another idea behind building apps for watchOS are the opportunities to make sure they're glanceable, which means the information should be readily available. Once you glance in your watch, you should see some information straight away without waiting for a very long time. And the always-on thing they introduced this year should help. Maybe they will fix the battery, it will be even better. But even if your screen is disabled by default and you look at your watch, you want to get some information straight away. So we shouldn't get any distractions. No annoying notifications which do not bring the content to the user. These snapshots, when you switch between apps, should be up to date to make sure the information is available even without switching to the app. And it should provide a complication in most cases to allow the user to put it straight on the home screen and see it straight away, whatever happens. And the notifications might use the custom notifications interfaces to help you build more interactable and more usable apps, which brings us to the next part, which is called actionable. So building actionable apps means they should be mindful of the information, and what is on screen should be as relevant as possible so the user can action straight away. And it should be refreshing in background, utilizing either the extended runtime or the background processes or getting the updates from somewhere else, and keep the user always being able to action straight away. And you might consider supporting custom actions and notifications, not just relying on notifications delivered to the watchOS by default, which means the user can get a notification and react straight away without launching your app. And also, all these apps should be responsive because interactions are meant to be quick. You don't want to interact with your Apple Watch for a very long time. It's faster to get an iPhone and just do whatever you want there. If you want users to use your app on watchOS, you should make sure the interactions are quick. Which brings us to minimizing the launch time. If you don't minimize the launch time of your app, if the spinner goes and goes for seconds, it's again easier to get the iPhone and check it there. And the immediate feedback is also very important because if you do something, if you expect your action to be delivered, you want to get feedback, whether it's a haptic engine providing something or a notification on the screen. And now, when we know about the principles, so how can we use them and utilize them to build the best user experience in watchOS apps? So first, we should care about creating account and signing in. Now, when we talk about independent watchOS apps, the user might not have an iPhone to create an account there and then use it on their Apple Watch. There might be no data to sign them in. So you should also always think about that. You should ask about proper permissions. For example, if you want to access HealthKit, again, the user might not have the iPhone, so you have to ask for the HealthKit access straight in the watch. You should be able to download data directly to the watch, because otherwise the user might not decide to wait till you get the phone and download the data on the phone and transfer it using the watch connectivity. And then you might be sending push notifications, and we got used to push notifications being displayed on the watch by default because, well, the phone receives them, the phone is disabled, they go straight to the watch. If I don't have my watch with me, however, my phone with me, however, I might want to get these notifications straight to my watchOS, in which case you should be able to send them directly to the user's watch. And all of that brings us to a lack of watch connectivity support anymore because we don't need it that much. We still can use it, but we can't rely on it to be our only source. We should consider other options, downloading it straight from the internet to have access to URL session, maybe using iCloud to sync, and so on. Maybe using the watchOS storage for that purpose as well. And Apple has this guide, ensuring your app runs independently, which covers these steps to some extent. Unfortunately, not detailed enough so we can make sure that the apps are running smoothly. And the best use case scenario would be to launch your app on the watchOS and disable your phone and see, can you replicate all these steps and make sure that the experience of the user is as good as possible. So let's talk in more details about all these parts. And the first one is extended runtime. So I told you that there are different tasks the extended runtime is designed for, and the first one is self-care, which means it should be focused. If you use this type of the extended runtime, you should make sure your app focuses on health or emotional well-being. And if it's not, you probably better choose another task to run for. All these sessions in the self-care are running up to 10 minutes, which means the system will kill the process after that time. And once you close the app, it closes the session. It was done to kind of garbage collect the leftovers of the app. And that pretty narrows down the amount of flows we can build. However, there are way more ways to interact with the extended runtime. For example, mindfulness, which allows us to build apps for silent or near silent meditation. And if you used any of those existing apps for watchOS, it's usually less convenient so far than using the apps built for iOS. But now we can create sessions running up to 1 hour, which is in most cases enough. And we can rely on exiting the app to kill the session, in which case the user can just open the app and make sure for 1 hour they won't be disturbed. They will be using the proper extended runtime session and concentrate on their silent or near silent meditation. If that's not the scenario you're targeting, you can use the physical therapy extended runtime. So it's a stretching, strengthening, or range of motion exercises. And it will be running in background, which makes sense as the user won't be probably sit still. And these sessions run up to 1 hour. And as I said, the move and exercise rings won't be affected because it won't be counted as a workout. And if you want that to be counted as a workout, then it's easier to redirect the user to the workout app. So in that case, we can build physical therapy apps and like stretching apps and so on using the extended runtime and utilize all of its possibilities, including the background runtime. Also, the health monitoring. So I said before that the heart rate sensor is disabled by default, but what if you want to build an app for health monitoring, for health checks? And in that case, you will need to require entitlement. You will need the user's permission, and you will need to explain why you want to interact with the sensors. And Apple tells us to use these respectfully, so we don't drain the battery that much, so we don't annoy the user with the constant notifications to check the health again, and so on. It will be continuously running in the background, which is also pretty convenient, so the user can turn it on and do the other stuff. And the separate extended runtime is the alarm runtime, which allows us to first, and which makes sense, monitor for the optimal time to alarm the user, to wake them up, or to notify them about something. We can schedule it up to 36 hours in advance, which gives us lots of flexibility. And all these sessions, the waking up sessions, would be running for up to 30 minutes, though we can run them in background. So that would allow us to build lots of new things in terms of alarms and the sleep trackers and so on. If you use that, you would have to use the WK interface device.play because they are deprecating the previous ways to interact with the sound. And it supports haptics, which is super convenient. You can use it straight out of the box with the extended runtime in background. So please have a look at the APIs because that might make your apps way, way better. Now, if you think about the next thing they introduced, the streaming audio API, it works pretty straightforward, but in the best practices, it would be to first check if the device supports audio streaming, because not all devices support it. And I would suggest thinking about caching, because if you stream audio straight to the watch, the data is probably limited, the battery is limited as well, and it's wise not to refetch something again and again. So please cache whatever you're streaming, at least for some time. Check for the reachability, because in lots of scenarios, users with the Apple Watch in their hand won't be able to use the internet. So in our case, we can check if the server we are trying to stream from is reachable and react accordingly. And do proper network transitions. Change the quality or bitrate. Think about the preciseness or the caching chunks when you transition from one network to another one, because that might make the user's experience way, way better. And this applies to audio quality as well. In most cases, we want to aim for the best quality possible, but sometimes we have to restrict ourselves and limit the users as well. The next point is signing in. So signing in is pretty straightforward. It is straightforward on iOS. It's straightforward on watchOS as well. You might want to support password autofill, which means you need to set the content type. And watchOS supports various content types. You can specify that this is a username, which will allow you to scribble something or use your voice. It might be the password, the new password, and one-time code, which would give these 6 fields where you can provide the code. And if you use the one-time code, it will even parse the messages to make sure that you can properly take the exact code straight from the messages without typing it on your own. So that's pretty powerful. If you set up your app's associated domains, you can get the auto-completion by default using the keychain data. And don't forget to add placeholders, because otherwise it might be very confusing for the user. What is that? Is it like a password, the username, whatever? Also, you might want to use the WK alert action if you want to display terms and conditions, because Apple claims that this is the best source of the data in that scenario. You can scroll it, you can use the crown, you can look at the terms and conditions, you can use the actions at the end of the alert to either agree with them or disagree. You can embed a text field into the sign-in flow so you can build your own forms, but don't forget about text content type. And once you did that, once your user signed up, you can start sending them push notifications, which is a new feature as well. You can target the device, the watchOS, directly by passing the iPhone as well. In which case, it's quite straightforward. So you import the WatchKit and user notifications framework. You use the extension delegate class, and you create or you add your method into the application did finish launching, where you would want to get the current notification center object and request authorization for, let's say, alerts and sounds. And based on the decision of the user, if this is granted, you can register for remote notifications. If it's not granted, you can process it properly, you can disable them, you can notify the server, you can use your tracking data to see that the user don't want the notifications at all. So please do that, because it's very simple to build, and it removes this dependency of your watchOS app from the iPhone. Because in most cases, when you would test your watchOS app, you probably would have your iPhone nearby, and you'll see the notifications going through. But if you think how notifications are important for some of the users, you might really want to send them directly to the watchOS. And once you did this registering, you can use the did register for remote notifications to forward the token to your provider to either Firebase or in-house solution or whatever else. And if it failed to register, you can disable these features, and you can show the user the sign saying that if you want to use that real-time update notification feature, please turn it on in settings. And once you receive the remote notification, you can use the completion handler of the fetch to handle it properly and pass the new data to make sure the process gets updated in background. So that was pretty straightforward as well. And as you can see, building features for watchOS and updating watchOS to make sure it's compatible with independent apps is pretty straightforward, and it won't require that much time or effort, but it might make life of your users way, way, way better. And by doing that, we open the world to a completely new device and a completely new mindset about building these applications, because watchOS powers Apple Watch, which is very personal to their users. It's on your wrist, it's always with you, and it's the closest connection with the user you might have in most cases. So by making this app independent, you can make sure that the user will always have your app on their wrist and interact with them a lot. Which brings us to the way to distribute these apps to users, the Watch App Store. So Watch App Store runs directly on the Apple Watch, and you don't need your iPhone to download apps to your watch anymore. You can go straight on the App Store, and you can find the app you need, you can sign in, you can download it, buy it if you need it, and you can just use it straight away. And as far as the app follows all the best practices and principles of building for independent watch, the user can be sure that they will be able to sign in properly, get all the remote notifications straight on their wrist, be able to stream audio, use the extended runtimes, and just have a pleasant experience. But what happens if you want to make sure that users sees our app in the Watch App Store? Even though it's pretty small right now, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because, well, lots of developers might put the check mark and the app goes straight to the Watch App Store, even though it's not properly optimized. So we might care first about the text optimization. If you look at the flow users follow when they search for an app in App Store on their iPhone, it's usually they use the search field, they type something there, maybe a few keywords, and they scroll through the list to find the app they want to download. So with Apple Watch, searching for long keywords is quite painful. Uh, Maybe using voice recognition might help, but in most cases, long queries would be difficult to send, and especially if you scribble something on the screen. So it's pretty much crucial to say that if you want to get your app visible to the majority of your users, you want to make sure it ranks high for the popular one or two word search term, because if you want to target long tail keywords or very long sentences, it just won't work. Users probably won't be bothered to look for such a long sentence and look for your app. Also, if you want to optimize your watch app screenshots for a small screen, you might consider redesigning them from scratch, because the watch app screen is tiny, and most of the apps available there show just the app interface in the watch app store. And if you want to stand out from that, you might use bright fonts, large text, contrast images to just make sure the users see your app in the list of apps and it stands out, not with just the apps interface, but maybe adjusting the apps interface to make sure it's more noticeable and visible on the watch. And because of that, users are less attracted to gray or black screenshots, which is in majority of cases the exact screenshots you would find in the App Store. If you look at the apps are getting downloaded more and more, they tend to change their screenshots to white, yellow, something eye-catching. And that might be a very good UI as well. It just means that you should think about contrast colors. People love contrast colors, especially in their watches. Ratings and reviews are always a very popular topic for discussion when it comes to apps. And while on iPhones or on Macs, it's easier to bring more text, more screenshots, more videos, work with the reviews to explain the users that the bug was fixed or something changed, and the new release came up. For users on the watchOS, the stars which indicate the rating you have, the average rating you have, are so visible and noticeable, it definitely will affect the downloading rate way, way more. Which means for us as developers, we should really care about our watchOS apps ratings, because otherwise, if it's lower than probably an average of 3, people won't be bothered downloading it. The interactions on watchOS should be fast. The decisions users will make will be very fast. And rating, such a visible rating, will be considered in most cases. And well, this one is tricky. I know what you're thinking, like, well, if I get featured, I'll be fine. Apps and games on watchOS, in most cases, would be downloaded by featuring. And their visibility on the Today page reduces all these pain of users trying to scribble down the keywords. For now, as that's a pretty new field and independent apps are not that common yet, most of the users will be looking at the Today screen and the editorial picks and the page collection, and the search itself is not that convenient to use, even if you target the low keywords and so on. But right now, when the market is so small, you can do your best using the best practices, the principles we were talking about today, the new APIs, and in that case, your app will definitely stand out and probably will be noticed and will be picked for the featuring. So I highly encourage you to follow these steps and see if you can get it to the top page of the App Store. So getting back to the summary of today's talk, we had a look at the Apple Watch, and it's not an iPhone's extension anymore. For lots of watchOS versions, we were thinking about the watchOS and Apple Watch as some kind of, in addition to an iPhone, a way to get notifications straight to our wrists, to be able to change music, to be able to look at our health data tracking the watch from our iPhone, or maybe sometimes, very rarely, trying to send a message in some messenger extension for the Apple Watch. But it wasn't convenient to use. It wasn't reliable to use, because once you don't have access to your iPhone, you went for a workout, you forgot to charge your phone, you just don't have it in the room, everything used to break. It wasn't really convenient to use Apple Watch as an independent device. But it's not an extension anymore. Now we can do that. Now we can build the whole flow straight from the Apple Watch, and the user's experience will be way, way better. So please check out the new APIs, have a look at the ways to build these apps better and faster and providing more opportunities for users. And look at the extended runtime because it's very, very powerful. The extended runtime gives you lots of opportunities and lots of inspiration for the apps not built yet, which means now you can finally target, for example, the meditation, the self-care flows. And think about App Store optimization, because with the Watch App Store, the optimization is important, and especially now when we target the users on smaller devices. If that wasn't enough, there are lots of very good talks from WWDC, streaming audio on watchOS 6, extended runtime for watchOS apps, and creating independent watchOS apps. So start with them. They have very good link suggestions in the end of the videos as well, so please give it a try. And I guess if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand now or find me after the talk. Thank you very much.